The invitation wasn't meant to honor her. It was meant to break her. After years of scrubbing his floors in silence, lowering her eyes whenever he walked past like she was invisible, he finally said her name. Cold, sharp, almost amused. "Come to the
We are
ceremony,"
inviting
he
you to
told
the
her,
party.
in front of everyone.
How can she be
They
there?
laughed, because everyone knew what this was, a show. A moment to remind the maid exactly where she belonged. So she came. But when the doors opened, the laughter died first. Then the whispers. Then the air itself seemed to freeze. Because the woman who stepped in wasn't the girl they remembered. Draped in elegance worth more than the mansion itself, diamonds catching the light like fire, confidence walking ahead of her like a warning. She didn't look like someone who came to be humiliated. She looked like someone who came to end a story. And as her eyes met his, the same man who once treated her like dust, his smile faded, slowly, painfully. Because in that moment, everyone realized the truth. He didn't invite her to shame her. He invited the wrong woman to the wrong stage, and now, she was about to rewrite everything. Before we continue this story, please hit the subscribe button, like, and share our video. It helps the channel to grow, and drop a comment below. Let me know if you're watching from the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom, or any other country. Let us know how far our video has traveled to, because what you're about to hear will take you through one of the most breathtaking transformations you have ever witnessed. A woman broken down to nothing, rebuilt into something no one saw coming, walking back into the room that tried to destroy her and leaving everyone speechless. Now let's get into this. Her name was Callie Renner. And if you passed her on the street in the spring of 2017, you would not have looked twice. You might not have looked once. She was 26 years old, 5'4", with dark circles under her eyes that told a story she never spoke out loud. She wore the same pair of worn sneakers for 11 months straight. The left sole had a small crack that let in rainwater, and on cold mornings, she would stuff tissue paper into the toe just to get through the day. She wasn't always like this. There was a version of Callie Renner that laughed loudly at dinner tables. A version that had a college acceptance letter pinned to her bedroom wall in Dayton, Ohio. A version with a mother who braided her hair on Sunday mornings and told her that the world owed her nothing, but she could still take everything she deserved. That mother, her name was Ruth, died of a stroke on a Tuesday in November when Callie was 22 years old. And with her, something in Callie went quiet. There was no savings account, no life insurance policy. There were hospital bills and a landlord who had already been patient for 3 months. There was a younger brother named Eli who was 16 and had nowhere else to go. And there was Callie, the oldest, standing in the parking lot of a hospital she couldn't afford, holding her dead mother's purse and realizing that the world she thought she understood had just closed a door she didn't even know was open. She dropped out of her first semester of community college within 2 weeks of Ruth's funeral. She told herself it was temporary. She told Eli it was temporary. She found a job waitressing at a diner called Patty's on Route 7, pulling double shifts on weekends, telling herself that by spring things would be different. Spring came. Things were not different. By the time she was 24, Eli was in a trade program, almost self-sufficient, and Callie had moved 3 times chasing cheaper rent. She had worked 7 jobs in 2 years. She cleaned offices. She stocked shelves. She babysat for families who sometimes forgot to pay her on time. Each job was a step she thought would lead somewhere, but somehow she kept ending up in the same place. Tired, behind, and invisible. Then came the Hargrove house. She found the listing on a neighborhood board. A private household in Westfield, New Jersey. Live-in position available. Housekeeping and light cooking. References required. Competitive pay. The listing had the address of a house she had actually driven past once and thought was a hotel. She applied anyway. The Hargrove estate was not a hotel, but it was close enough to make that mistake. It sat at the end of a private lane behind a wrought iron gate, surrounded by old oak trees that had probably been there since before Callie's grandmother was born. The house itself was 4 stories of stone and glass, with a circular driveway and a fountain in the center that was always running, even in December, as if the Hargroves wanted the world to know that they had water to waste. The man who hired her was named Preston Hargrove III. He went by Preston. He was 41 years old, thin in the way that rich men who don't eat enough tend to be thin, with silver-touched hair and the kind of confident jaw that only comes from never once doubting your own importance. He had dark green eyes that seemed to be calculating something even when he smiled, and he smiled often, but never warmly. The interview lasted 12 minutes. Preston sat across from Callie at a kitchen table the size of a small boat and asked her 3 questions. Could she cook? Did she have reliable transportation? Would she sign a non-disclosure agreement? She said yes to all 3. He handed her a folder without looking up from his phone. The folder contained her start date, her duties, and the NDA, which was 4 pages long and written in language that made her head swim. She signed it. She needed the job. She started the following Monday. The household had a rhythm. Preston was almost never home before 7 in the evening, and when he was, he moved through the rooms like a man who expected the house to arrange itself around him. He had a housekeeper before Callie, a woman named Mrs. Beale who had apparently retired, and whose ghost seemed to haunt every cabinet and drawer in the form of overly organized spice racks and labeled storage boxes. The expectation was clear: maintain what was already perfect and do not be noticed while doing it. Callie was very good at not being noticed. There was a cook named Albert who came 3 times a week. There was a groundskeeper named Terry who kept the gardens in a state of almost aggressive beauty. There was a part-time driver named Ray who ferried Preston to and from the city and seemed to regard Callie with the quiet solidarity of someone else who understood what it meant to be essential and invisible at the same time. The pay was better than anything Callie had made before. Not life-changing money, but enough to stabilize. Enough to pay down some of Ruth's old medical debt. Enough to send Eli a little something on his birthday. But money was the only thing the job was generous with. Preston Hargrove was not a cruel man in the way that some people are cruel. Loudly, obviously, with malice you can see coming. He was cruel the way cold weather is cruel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply moved through life as though the people who served him were furniture, functional, necessary, replaceable, and beneath comment. He never said good morning to Callie. Not once in 2.5 years. He would walk into a room she was cleaning and look through her, literally through her, the way you look through a window. He would notice the room, but not the person making it clean. If she was mopping a hallway, he would step around the mop without breaking stride and without acknowledging that a human being was on the other end of it. At first, Callie told herself this was just how wealthy people were. She had not grown up around money, and maybe this was simply the etiquette of it, a professional distance that kept things clean. Maybe he was just focused, just busy, just distracted. But there were moments that made it harder to believe that. There was the Tuesday afternoon in her 3rd month when Preston had a friend over, a loud, well-dressed man named Garrett who laughed at everything. And Callie came in to clear the lunch plates from the sitting room. Garrett glanced at her and made a comment about the house being spotless. Preston replied, without looking up from his drink, "That's what you pay them for." Not even she. Them. A category. A function. There was the December evening when Preston's mother, a thin, imperious woman named Catherine Hargrove, came for dinner and commented that the centerpiece needed to be moved 6 inches to the left. Callie moved it. Catherine said, louder, "You'd think she would have known that already." Callie said nothing. She had learned that saying nothing was the safest language in that house. And then there was Preston's girlfriend. Her name was Brittany, and she arrived in Callie's 2nd year like a weather system. She was 35, blonde, and the kind of beautiful that takes a great deal of money and effort to maintain. She was not unkind in the calculated way Preston was. She was unkind the way someone is unkind when they have never been told to be otherwise. She left her clothes on bathroom floors. She misplaced things and told Callie the things had been moved. She once spilled an entire bottle of red wine on the sitting room rug and called out from the hallway, "Hey, there's been a little accident in the sitting room," in a voice that sounded like she was reporting the weather. But none of that broke Callie. What Callie carried through all of it was something that looked, from the outside, like submission. Head down, quiet hands, eyes lowered when he walked past. But on the inside, in the private room of her own mind, Callie Renner was doing something that no one in that house knew about. She was building something. It had started almost by accident. In her 2nd month at the Hargrove house, Callie had found a book in Preston's library, a room he apparently used as a prop because the books on the shelves had never been touched. The book was called The Art of Real Estate Capital, and it was written by a man named Gordon Fells, who had started with nothing in rural Georgia in the 1970s and built a portfolio worth hundreds of millions by the time he retired. Callie had been dusting the shelves when the spine caught her eye. She borrowed it. She read it in her room at night, after her shift, sitting on the edge of her bed with a cup of instant noodles, reading until her eyes burned. Then she read it again. Then she went to the library, the public library, 3 miles away, which she visited on her days off, and found every book she could on real estate investment, market cycles, and small business finance. She was not wasting time in that house. She was going to school. Over the next 18 months, Callie read 43 books on finance, investment strategy, real estate law, and entrepreneurship. She opened a high-yield savings account and deposited a fixed percentage of every paycheck before she touched the rest. She joined an online forum for first-time investors and asked questions under a username no one knew was her. She found a mentor through that forum, a woman in Phoenix named Darla who had built a small but profitable rental property business from a single duplex she purchased on a shoestring, and they talked every other Sunday on the phone for 6 months. She made her first investment in the spring of her second year at the house. It was a small thing, a real estate investment trust, a REIT, that she had researched for 3 months before committing. She put in $400. It felt like dropping a stone into a very deep well. But the stone landed. Over the next several months, she reinvested every return. She studied market patterns the way some people study religion, with devotion and precision and a belief that the answers were there if she was willing to look hard enough. She started following 3 financial newsletters. She built a spreadsheet that tracked her net position every Sunday morning, sitting at the small desk in her room in the Hargrove house, her fingers moving across the keyboard quietly while the house slept around her. She did not tell anyone. Not Eli. Not Darla. Not Ray the driver, who was the closest thing she had to a friend in that house. She kept it completely private because she had learned, in the years since her mother died, in every job and every humiliation, that people would find a way to take from you what they knew you had. And she wasn't ready to be taken from yet. By the end of her second year at the Hargrove house, her portfolio had grown to just over $11,000. It doesn't sound like much, but $11,000, when you started with 400, is not a number. It's proof. It's proof that the system works if you work it. It's proof that patience is a form of power. It's proof that a woman scrubbing floors in someone else's house at 6 in the morning can be building something that will one day make that house look small. And then something happened that changed everything. It was an evening in October of her second year. Preston was hosting a dinner, one of his semi-regular gatherings of business associates, men in good suits who talked about money in the relaxed way of people who have never worried about it. Callie was on serving duties that evening, moving between the kitchen and the dining room with plates and glasses, refilling water, clearing courses. Midway through the meal, the conversation turned to real estate. Specifically, it turned to a commercial property on the edge of town, a former textile warehouse that had been sitting vacant for 3 years. One of Preston's guests, a heavy-set man named Douglas, was complaining that the property had become an eyesore and that someone ought to do something about it. Another guest said the zoning was complicated. A third said the price was probably unrealistic for the current market. Preston said he had looked at it 2 years ago and passed. The infrastructure costs alone would eat you alive, he said, confident and final. Callie refilled his water glass without being asked. She moved back to the kitchen, and she thought about the warehouse. She had driven past it before. She knew the street. She knew the neighborhood, which was rough around the edges but had 2 things working in its favor: a new transit line that had opened 8 months ago, and a wave of small creative businesses that had started colonizing the surrounding blocks, drawn by cheap space and good bones. She went home that night and researched the property for 4 hours. The price had dropped twice in 18 months. The current listing was far below what comparable properties had sold for in neighborhoods with similar transit access. The zoning issue Douglas had mentioned was real but not insurmountable. There had been a variance approved on an adjacent property the previous year that set a clear precedent. The infrastructure costs Preston had cited were from a contractor estimate that had been done 2 years before the area's new utility upgrades had gone in. Preston was wrong. He was confident and experienced and wealthy, and he was wrong. Callie didn't sleep that night. She spent the next 2 weeks mapping the deal. She talked to Darla on the phone for 3 hours one Sunday. She consulted 2 different real estate attorneys through an online service that cost $40 per consultation. She ran numbers until the numbers ran themselves. Then she called a broker. Her $11,000 was not enough to purchase the warehouse. Not even close. But it was enough for a different kind of move. A real estate syndicate, a group of small investors pooling capital to take a stake in a larger deal. She had been following one such group, a small collective of independent investors who focused on undervalued commercial properties, through the forum she'd been using. She reached out. She presented her research. They were interested. The deal took 4 months to close. It was 4 months of Callie waking at 5 in the morning, responding to emails before her shift started, taking phone calls during her lunch break, while sitting in the back garden of the Hargrove house with her voice low. For months of negotiation and paperwork and 2 moments where she was almost certain it was going to fall apart. It didn't fall apart. The warehouse sold 18 months later for a figure that gave Callie stake a return that made her hand shake when she saw it on the screen. She stared at the number for a long time. Then she quietly got up, made herself a cup of tea, sat back down, and started looking for the next deal. Because that's who Callie Renner was. Not the woman who cried when she won. The woman who won and then went back to work. Over the next year and a half, she reinvested with increasing precision and increasing confidence. She partnered with the syndicate on 2 more deals. She made a private equity play on a regional logistics company that Darla had flagged, and that returned better than either of them had projected. She found a mentor in finance, a retired investment banker named Howard, who she met through Darla, who spent 6 months teaching her about portfolio construction and risk management for the price of 1 phone call per week and a handwritten thank you card, which she sent him every Christmas. She stayed in the Hargrove house. This is the part people find hardest to understand. She had money now. Real money. Growing money. Why did she stay? Because the house was free housing. Because every month she wasn't paying rent was another month of capital she could deploy. Because she had learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is give them no reason to change their assessment. Let them look through you. Let them see the furniture. While the furniture builds an empire. She stayed for the invisibility. And she stayed because something in her, something quiet and patient and shaped by years of swallowing her own worth, needed to see it through to the end. She didn't know what the end looked like yet, but she knew it was coming. It came on a Wednesday morning in March. Preston called a household meeting, which was unusual. He gathered Callie, Albert, and Terry in the kitchen and announced that he would be hosting the Hargrove family's annual spring ceremony the following month. The ceremony was a tradition, a formal gathering of the extended Hargrove family and their closest associates, held every year to celebrate the family's business legacy and, in practice, to allow Preston to display his wealth and status to the people he cared most about impressing. He announced the date. He announced that the house would need to be in exceptional condition. He talked about the catering, the flowers, the setup. Albert nodded. Terry nodded. Callie took notes. Then, at the end, Preston did something he had never done before. He looked directly at Callie. Not through her. At her. She didn't know what to do with that, for half a second. You should come, he said. His voice was even, unreadable. The air in the kitchen changed. Albert looked at the floor. Terry suddenly found the window very interesting. Callie held Preston's gaze. I'm sorry. The ceremony, he said. You should attend. As a guest. He paused, just long enough for the pause to mean something. You've been here long enough. It seems right. He almost smiled. Not warmly. Never warmly. She understood immediately what this was. She had been around this family long enough to understand their social geometry. The ceremony was attended by people who mattered, business partners, family members, old money neighbors, the kind of guests who arrived in cars that cost more than most people's houses. Inviting the maid to attend as a guest was not an act of inclusion. It was a performance. It was Preston Hargrove creating a moment, a beautifully staged, well-witnessed moment, in which the help stood in the middle of a room full of extraordinary wealth and was gently, publicly, irrefutably reminded of her place. It was the kind of cruelty that disguises itself as generosity, the kind that leaves no fingerprints. And she understood something else, too. He wanted her to say yes so that she would show up. Plain, quiet, uncomfortable, wearing something from a department store, shifting her weight in borrowed shoes, painfully aware of every difference between herself and everyone else in that room. He wanted to see it. Maybe they all did. She looked at him for just a moment. Thank you, she said. I'll be there. She turned and walked back to her duties. And when she was alone, in her room, that night, She sat on the edge of her bed and felt something move through her. Not anger exactly. Anger is hot, and this was different. It was cool and clear and certain, the way water is clear. She sat with it for a few minutes. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. The person she called was a woman named Simone, who ran a luxury styling and concierge service out of Manhattan and who had been, until 18 months ago, the personal shopper for a hedge fund manager whose wife was one of Darla's clients. Callie had met Simone once, briefly, at a dinner Darla had invited her to. One of the first fancy dinners Callie had attended in her new life, and Simone had handed her a card and said, with a look that suggested she was not in the habit of handing out cards to everyone, "When you're ready." Callie had kept the card in the back of her planner for a year and a half. "Simone," she said when the line connected. "I'm ready." She told Simone 3 things. She told her the date of the event. She told her the setting. Formal, wealthy, the kind of room that knew exactly what everything cost. And she told her one more thing. "I need to walk into that room and end an era." Simone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send me your measurements and your budget." "No ceiling on the budget." "No ceiling," Callie confirmed. She gave Simone access to a line of credit she had set up 3 months prior, one of several she had carefully built as part of her financial architecture, and then she put the phone down and felt, for the first time in years, completely calm. In the weeks that followed, Callie continued working in the Hargrove house exactly as she always had. She cleaned. She cooked when Albert wasn't in. She organized the flowers that arrived for the ceremony setup. She ironed the tablecloths. She helped position the chairs in the grand salon. She moved through the house like weather, present everywhere, noticed nowhere. Preston barely spoke to her. Brittany asked her twice if she was coming to the party. The way she asked it, light, curious, with a small smile, made clear that Brittany was looking forward to the spectacle too. "It'll be good for you to see how these things work," Brittany said once, as though she were doing Callie a favor. "I'm sure it will be," Callie said. She worked. She smiled quietly. She waited. Simone called her 4 times during the 3 weeks of preparation. She had sourced a gown from a couture designer in Paris whose work had appeared at the Met Gala 3 times in the past decade. The gown was deep midnight blue, almost black, with a structured silhouette that Simone described as architectural power. The fabric was a silk so fine it moved like water. The embroidery at the collar was done entirely by hand. The jewelry was separate. Simone had a contact, a dealer, exclusive, the kind whose showroom didn't have a public address, and she arranged for Callie to have access to a loan of pieces for the evening. The centerpiece was a diamond necklace, estate-sourced, certified, worth in the neighborhood of $8 million. The earrings, a bracelet, the ring, the total package was valued at just over $10 million. $10 million in diamonds, worn by a woman who had once stuffed tissue in her shoes to keep out the rain. She also arranged for a car. Not a hired car. Not a rideshare. A 1962 Bentley S2 Continental in cream, privately owned by a collector in Connecticut who occasionally lent it to Simone's clients for special occasions. The car was beautiful in the way that very old, very expensive things are beautiful, quietly, without needing to explain itself. On the morning of the ceremony, Callie woke up at 5 as always. She completed her morning tasks, as always. She set the breakfast things. She laid out the fresh flowers for the downstairs reception tables. She pressed the staff uniforms that the hired waitstaff would be wearing that evening. She worked until noon, quietly, without variation. Then she went to her room. She had arranged to be ready at a private location, a hotel suite Simone had booked, where a hair and makeup team would be waiting. She packed a small bag with her dress shoes, her clutch, and a single photograph she carried with her everywhere. Her mother, Ruth, laughing in the kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, wearing a floral apron, her head tilted back, all joy. She held the photograph for just a moment before she put it in the bag. Then she walked out of the Hargrove house through the side door she always used. And she did not feel small. She felt like the whole long road behind her, every floor she'd scrubbed, every ignored good morning, every moment she had swallowed her worth and kept moving, had been leading exactly here. The hotel suite was everything Simone promised. The team was waiting. There were 3 of them, a hairstylist, a makeup artist, and an assistant who managed the jewelry. They worked on Callie for 2.5 hours, and for most of that time Callie sat very still, looking at herself in the mirror with an expression that people who didn't know her might have read as serenity. It wasn't serenity exactly. It was the face of a woman watching herself become what she always was. The gown went on last. The midnight blue silk pulled around her feet like a promise. The necklace went on next, the assistant's hands careful and practiced, and when the diamonds settled at Callie's throat, catching the light in the room and throwing it back in every direction, Callie finally exhaled. The mirror showed her someone she recognized. Not the girl with the cracked shoes. Not the woman who lowered her eyes. Someone else. Someone Ruth would have recognized. Someone Ruth would have stood up straighter to see. She gathered herself. She picked up her clutch. She walked out to the Bentley. The Hargrove estate was at its peak that evening. The driveway was lined with luxury vehicles, German sedans, Italian sports cars, a Rolls-Royce parked near the fountain that was still running, still wasting its water. The lights inside the house were warm and golden. Through the tall front windows, Callie could see the silhouettes of guests moving, the flash of crystal glassware, the easy gestures of people comfortable in excess. The Bentley stopped at the top of the driveway. The driver came around to open the door. Callie stepped out. Later, people would describe this moment in different ways. Brittany would say she felt the cold before she saw who it was. Catherine Hargrove would say she thought for a moment it was a guest she had forgotten inviting. Someone important, someone from Europe, perhaps a diplomat. One of Preston's business associates would say he stopped mid-sentence and genuinely lost his train of thought, something he claimed had never happened to him in 30 years. The doorman, a hired man for the evening who did not know Callie, stepped forward and opened the front door of the Hargrove house for her with the instinctive deference of someone who recognized, without having to think about it, that the woman in front of him was someone you opened doors for. She walked in. The grand salon held 67 people. Within 4 seconds, it held 67 people who had stopped talking. The silence moved through the room like something physical. It started at the door and rippled outward, conversations dying in the middle of sentences, heads turning, wine glasses pausing halfway to mouths. The string quartet in the corner faltered, the violinist losing her place, the cellist turning to see what had happened. And then the whispers. Because people needed to fill the silence with something, and the something they reached for was each other's ears, low and urgent. Who is that? Do you know her? Has Preston been holding out on us? Is she from the city? Is she European? Look at that necklace. Is that real? It was real. Brittany was the first person Callie recognized. She was standing near the fireplace in a cream gown that she had spent 3 weeks choosing, and her face, as she processed what she was seeing, went through 3 distinct stages in approximately 2 seconds. First, the automatic appreciation of someone who understands fashion, the gown, the hair, the jewelry hitting her trained eye all at once. Second, the beginning of a smile, the social reflex of welcoming a notable guest. Third, recognition. The smile didn't die. It didn't get the chance to fully form. Brittany's hand, the one holding a champagne flute, went very still. Catherine Hargrove turned next. The older woman had the practiced control of someone who had attended hundreds of these events and prided herself on never being visibly surprised by anything. But something happened in Catherine's expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight parting of the lips. That was as close to shock as Catherine Hargrove was capable of producing in public. And then there was Preston. He was in the center of the room, mid-conversation with Douglas, the man who had complained about the warehouse at dinner almost 2 years ago. He had his back 3/4 to the door. He was laughing at something. A real laugh, relaxed, the laugh of a man in his element, in his house, in his power. He heard the silence before he turned. You could see it register in his posture, the laugh dying, his shoulders going very slightly still, the change in atmosphere reaching him like a sound he couldn't place. He turned. His eyes found Callie immediately. And for just a moment, just a breath, Preston Hargrove had absolutely no idea what to do with his face. He had expected her. He had planned this. He had set this stage with deliberate care. He had imagined this moment. The maid walking in, overwhelmed, out of place, gratefully and painfully aware of the gap between where she was and where everyone else was. What he had not planned for was this. What he had not planned for was a woman who did not look like she had come to be looked at. She looked like she had come to do something. Callie moved through the room without rushing. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter with a quiet thank you. She acknowledged the stares with the composed, minimal grace of someone who had learned, slowly and deliberately, what it meant to take up space without apology. She made her way toward the center of the room. People stepped aside for her. Not consciously, instinctively. The kind of parting that happens when a room rearranges itself around a new kind of gravity. Douglas, still standing beside Preston, said something low. Preston didn't respond. He was watching Callie cross the room and doing the thing that rich, powerful men who have never been surprised almost never have to do: recalculating. She stopped in front of him. The distance between them was perhaps 4 feet. Exactly the kind of distance you maintain when you have something to say and you want no one else to hear it. She looked at him. He looked at her. In all the years she had worked in this house, they had never looked at each other. Not really. He had looked through her. She had looked at the floor. This was the first time their eyes had actually met, and it lasted perhaps 5 seconds, and in those 5 seconds a great deal was communicated without a single word. She saw him understand. Not just that she had money. He could see the money. Anyone could see the money. But that the money was not the point. The point was what the money represented. The point was the years of quiet, careful, deliberate work that had been happening 3 floors below his feet while he walked through his house without seeing her. The point was the warehouse deal he had passed on, the one she had taken, the one that had started everything. The point was that she had been in this house, learning everything she needed to learn, building everything she needed to build, and he had never noticed. Because she was the maid. Because he had never once thought to look. His face had gone a particular shade that had nothing to do with color and everything to do with comprehension. It was the face of a man arriving, too late, at an understanding he should have reached years ago. She smiled at him. It was not a triumphant smile. It was not unkind. It was the smile of someone who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has just put it down. "Thank you for the invitation," she said. Her voice was clear and even. "You have a beautiful home." She moved on. She spent the rest of the evening doing exactly what you do at a gathering like this. She spoke to people. She listened carefully. She made herself memorable in the right ways. Within 40 minutes, she had exchanged cards with 2 of Preston's business associates who had sought her out specifically. Men who understood the language of what she was wearing and what it meant, and who wanted to know where the woman in the midnight blue gown came from. She told them a simplified version of the truth. She had been in real estate investment for the past several years. She was currently exploring opportunities in commercial development. She was based in the New York metro area. One of the men, his name was Warren, and he ran a private equity firm out of Midtown, said he had a project he was looking to bring new partners into and would love to continue the conversation. He said this with the particular focus of a man who has suddenly become aware that he is talking to someone worth being very attentive to. She gave him her card. It was a card she had designed 6 months ago, when she officially registered her holding company. The company had a name, Renner Capital Partners, and an address in Jersey City, and a website that she had paid a designer to make look exactly as serious as it needed to look. Warren turned the card over in his fingers, reading the company name, and then looked at her with a slightly different expression than the one he'd had 30 seconds before. "Renner Capital," he said. "That's right," she said. Catherine Hargrove approached her at some point in the second hour. The older woman moved with great deliberateness, the way people do when they are taking time to compose themselves before arriving at a conversation. She stopped beside Callie and for a moment said nothing. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." Callie looked at her. Catherine's voice was tight with the effort of this. "I have not been. I was not. You were in my son's home for years, and I never once." She stopped. "Started again. You deserved better treatment." Callie considered her for a moment. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said gently, "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because I was invited." She smiled and moved on. Preston found her near the end of the evening. The guests had thinned, and the house was quieter, and he materialized beside her while she was standing near the tall window looking out at the fountain. He stood next to her for a moment without speaking. "How long?" he finally said. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. "The whole time," she said. He was quiet. "The warehouse," he said. It wasn't really a question. "The warehouse," she confirmed. Another silence. Longer this time. "I should have," he stopped himself. "Started again. I thought," stopped again. She looked at him, and again, it was not a cruel look. She had not come here to wound him. She had come here because she was not the woman he thought she was, and she needed him to know that, and she needed everyone in this room to know that. And more than all of that, she needed to know it herself. I know what you thought, she said. You thought I was someone who didn't matter. Most of the time, that made me invisible. But once, she paused. Once, it made me very, very useful. She looked back out at the fountain. I learned more in your house than I learned anywhere else, she said. It was almost warm when she said it. I watched how you made decisions. I watched what you passed on and why. I watched how people in your world moved, what they valued, what they underestimated. She let that land. So thank you. For that, at least. She turned from the window. I'm leaving the position, she said. It was almost an afterthought in its delivery. I have people who can help you find someone new. He said nothing. She picked up her clutch. Good night, Mr. Hargrove. She walked to the door. The Bentley was waiting. In the weeks that followed, Callie Renner's life moved fast in the way that things move when the conditions for change have been quietly building for years and finally tip all at once. She met with Warren twice in the first week after the ceremony. The project he had mentioned was a significant one, a mixed-use development in a growing New Jersey corridor that he was looking to bring institutional-level private investment into. The numbers were very good. The risks were real but manageable. She spent 3 days in deep due diligence and came back with a list of questions that made Warren look at her with open and genuine respect. She came in as a partner. Eli flew in from Dayton the weekend she signed the papers. He was 28 now, settled, doing well in his trade. She had never told him the full story of the past few years, and she told it to him now, over dinner at a restaurant she chose because it had been on her list for 2 years and she had been waiting for the right moment. He listened without speaking for a long time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression she recognized from childhood, the same expression he used to wear when she came home after a double shift and made them both dinner anyway. A mixture of awe and something that was almost grief for the years it had cost her. You should have told me, he said. I wasn't ready, she said. Mom would have, he stopped. I know, she said. They sat with that for a moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and they stayed there for a while, in the good restaurant, in the good light, with the whole long road behind them and something new and unobstructed ahead. Darla came to see the new apartment 6 weeks later. Callie had moved into a place in Jersey City with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Manhattan skyline. It was not extravagant. She was not that kind of person, but it was beautiful and it was hers. And when the morning light came through those windows, it fell across the floors like something she had earned. Darla walked through each room slowly, the way you walk through something you want to remember. Look at you, she said finally. Look at me. Callie agreed and laughed, really laughed, the way she used to laugh before her mother died, from the chest, with her head thrown back. Howard, her finance mentor, sent her a handwritten letter when she told him about the partnership. He was 81 and wrote letters the old-fashioned way, on cream stationery in a precise, narrow hand. He said he had known, from the first time she asked him a question, that she had a particular kind of intelligence, not the kind that shows off, but the kind that accumulates. He said he was proud of her in the way he would have been proud of a granddaughter, if he had one. She framed the letter and hung it in her office. She also kept the photograph of Ruth. It moved from her planner to the corner of her desk. Ruth laughing in the kitchen in Dayton, Ohio, in the floral apron, her head tilted back. Some mornings, before Callie opened her laptop and began the work of the day, the calls, the analysis, the careful, deliberate forward movement of a life she had built from nothing, she would look at that photograph for a moment. And she would think, I see you, Mom. I kept moving. The Hargrove house sold the following year. Preston had made some decisions that didn't work out the way he planned. The kind of decisions that confident men make when they have never been challenged and which compound over time into a particular kind of reckoning. The sale of the estate was reported briefly in a local real estate newsletter. Callie read about it on her phone while sitting at her desk in her office in Jersey City, the Manhattan skyline behind her, a cup of good coffee in her hand. She read it once. Then she set her phone down and went back to work. Because she was not a person who looked back. She was a person who had learned, in the hardest possible school, that the best revenge is not a scene or a moment or a look across a room full of people holding expensive glasses. The best revenge is building something so real, so solid, so undeniably yours, that the people who once looked through you spend the rest of their lives trying to understand when, exactly, they stop being the most important person in the room. And by the time they figure it out, by the time they trace it back to the Tuesday mornings and the mopped hallways and the dinner plates they let you clear without a word, you're already gone. You're already somewhere they can't reach. That's what Callie Renner learned. In the years she spent building an empire in a room they thought she was only cleaning. That invisibility, in the right hands, is not a cage. It's a blueprint. And blueprints, in the right hands, become buildings. And buildings, over time, become legacies. And legacies, she knew now, are what mothers leave their daughters. Even when they leave too soon. Even when the only thing they manage to pass down is the particular, unbreakable belief that their daughter, quiet, determined, watching from the corner of the room, matters. Even then, especially then, drop another comment and tell us. Have you ever been in a room where someone looked right through you like you weren't there? And if you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently? Have you ever been underestimated, really, truly underestimated, by someone who had no idea what you were building in the silence? If you have, tell us your story in the comment section. We want to hear it. Thanks for watching, besties.